Hello, I'm so glad you're here. This is Jennifer McGuire. Now, if you've watched my videos in the past, you know that I really like to focus on teaching techniques and ways to stretch your supplies to get more value from it. You may also have heard me mention in videos that I recommend trying to think of 5 ways to use a product before you bring it into your craft space. That way, again, you can get more value from it. Well, people ask about those 5 ways. How do I come up with the 5 ways to use a product? Well, I thought I'd share that with you today. Now, in my videos, I don't always show those 5 ways because I don't have time, but I'll come up with the 5 ways and then pick 1 or 2 to share with you. So today I will share that thought process with you, and I will focus on one product. But stay tuned to the end because I have 2 bonus cards that I think you'll like. Also, before I jump in, I did want to mention that Spellbinders is right now having their biggest sale of the year, and I will put a link to the deals in my description below. This is early access to their Black Friday deals. So there are free gifts, doorbuster deals. There are some products that are as low as $1. A lot of great stamps, dies, embossing folders, foil plates, and more. I don't usually share this information in my video, but this is definitely one that is worth checking out, especially if you want to save $1 or 2 on some favorite products. Also, a reminder that the shopping sales of Black Friday are almost upon us, and I will have a complete list along with exclusive offers for my readers. I will put a link to my Crafty News page below, and you can sign up there to subscribe so you're notified when the deals start rolling in. Okay, let's get started. The product I chose to focus on today to demonstrate these ideas is from Spellbinders. It's a stitching die set, but you definitely could skip the stitching, and I'll show an example of that. I'm a big fan of Spellbinders products because I think they have great value and quality, and their designs are always outstanding. However, keep in mind that the 5 ideas I'm sharing today could be applied to a variety of products that you may have on hand or may be considering in the future. Before we start creating, I wanted to show you where I got the color inspiration for today's cards. This is a bundle from Pashta Designs. They call them Color Story Collections. And there are a bunch of things that come in the bundle. You have these little beads and sequins, you have rolls of felt, and you have some DMC floss for stitching. I saw this bundle when I was shopping on the Pashta Designs website. She has a lot of stitching dies also. I will use the thread today and I'll use a little bit of the felt, but I wanted to show you where my color inspiration came from. So using those color ideas, I did some die cutting off screen and I have them all in these little trays. Now I did do some die cutting with another Spellbinders die set, which I'll show you later on. But at the beginning here, I'm really going to focus mostly on that one stitching die set. But I like to do a bunch of die cutting at first so that doesn't like slow down my creative process. Now that I have prepped some die cuts, it's time to look at the 5 different ways to use this die set. Normally, I just write the 5 ideas on a Post-it note and stick it on the product so that it's ready when it's time to use it. However, today I'm going to attempt to do all 5 ideas for the video. So I have 5 containers for the 5 different card ideas. The 5th container is just off screen, sorry about that. Now in each of these, I have the die cuts that I plan to use and a Post-it note with the idea. I find that this is really helpful if I'm planning to sit down to make this many cards. Otherwise, I would just put the die cuts in a little pocket and save it with the product if I want to come back to it later. So now we can go through the 5 ways I approach a new product to come up with card ideas. The first one is very obvious but can be very helpful, and that is to follow an example. Many of these companies have lots of card ideas on their website, so you just find that product and look at those card ideas and take one of those as inspiration. This is often best if you have a complicated product because that way you can play with it, get to know it before you get more creative. So this first card is about using the product as it was intended. Now I'm going to do stitching on this, but you could skip it if you wanted to. I have my 6-ply DMC floss. I will link to sources for all this below. And I have a needle. Now I'm doing basic stitching here. You could totally step these up, which we'll talk about later, but I'm going with the basic stitching. When I do stitching with Spellbinders die cuts, I usually use 3-ply of the 6-ply. So I pinch the 6-ply with my fingers over in my right hand, and I pull 1 ply out at a time with my left hand. So I pull out 3 plies, and then I put them back together again. By separating the 3 strands and then putting back together, it really does give a better stitched look because they're not all twisted together. I'll save the other 3 ply for later stitching. Now I'm not going to go too deep into stitching on die cuts today because this is something that I've shown many times in video, and I will show an in-depth video up here on the top right and in my description below if you really want to learn. But I'll just show you how I get started. I have those 3 strands on my needle. You can see that there with one long tail and one short tail. I use a piece of Scotch tape to tape the end on the back of my die cut. Now there are a million ways you can start and end your stitching. I just find that this gives very flat results and works well for me when stitching on die cuts. However, that video I mentioned does show different options. I go up the first hole and down the next. And in this case, it's going out to the edge and then back through that main hole. Super easy to do, and Spellbinders is awesome because their dies actually emboss or impress lines showing you where the stitches go. So there's no guesswork, you just follow those impressed lines, connecting the one hole to the next. Once I've done all the stitching on the die cut, I will just flip it over, tape the end, and cut it short. Now the nice thing about this is these are smaller die cuts, so they don't take long to stitch at all. And this is something that I love to take on the go with me or to just do on the sofa while I watch a movie. I will continue to do the same type of stitching on all of the different die cuts, and I like to use a floss that matches the cardstock so that the stitching is a little more subtle. Now I know stitching isn't for everyone, but I think it's something worth trying because it's very calming and it really adds to the homemade feel of a card. So I will continue to stitch the other die cuts just following that example that's on the website. Now we can glue those die cuts together. I like to use Gina K Connect liquid adhesive in a fine tip bottle. That way I can put a kind of a small blob of that adhesive down and lay my stitched die cuts into it. I find this holds very well and works well even with all of those stitching and tape on the back of these die cuts. So here I'm just gluing them together following that example on the website. This allows me to kind of get to know the product, get comfortable with it so I can get a little more creative. And as I'm putting it together, I'm thinking of ways I can change it up. For example, looking at this, I could cut off 2 of those petals so I have a flower with only 3 petals, something that's a bit smaller. Or I can use the individually stitched petals as leaves or even create a border on a card with them. At this point, I thought I was going to layer this all together, but I was trying to decide if I wanted to take out that darker coral die cut stitch piece. And I'm looking at the examples on the website. Spellbinders has lots of them. And in the end, I decided to leave out that coral piece and I'll just save it for another card. So I am following that example on the website, but really just using it kind of as a starting point to get me going, to get me creative, and sometimes I really need that. Sometimes the mojo is nowhere to be found, and just following an example or following someone else's lead is all you need to get going. Now you could just add that flower to a card and be good to go, but one of the things that I like to do is incorporate an additional product on almost every card. That way I get more use of my products. I was really excited about this BetterPress plate from Spellbinders. I love the design of it, and that there are those small sentiments that you can use also. I will demonstrate how the BetterPress works, and I'll have a bonus card with this at the end of this video. But do know that if you don't have a BetterPress system, the BetterPress plates foil wonderfully with the Glimmer machine. So that's something to keep in mind. I'm not doing foiling today, but instead just using the BetterPress how it's intended to be used. So this is the BetterPress system here, and I have done a complete video on this. I'll link to it up here on the top right and in my description below. It is really easy to use. I put my BetterPress plate onto the gray platform, and now I'm putting some adhesive, just rolled pieces of tape, on the back side of this clear plate that's on top. Onto this tape, I will place my peach cardstock, and I just put it in the little tick marks so that I know it'll line up with my background. So I'll press that on there. You could use temporary adhesive instead of rolled tape if you want to. All right, now we need to add ink to this. You could use the BetterPress ink that Spellbinders has, but I find I can use almost every other ink I have in my stash. This is Altenew Fresh Dye Ink, which works really well on the BetterPress. So I'm just inking it up as if this were a stamp. I will then take the top plate and put it in position. It just pops onto the 4 magnets in the corner, and it's just kind of hovering over it. It's not actually touching the BetterPress plate yet. Now I'll run this whole thing through my Spellbinders Platinum die cut machine that presses the cardstock and the plate together, leaving a small impression and all of the ink behind. The best part of this is the detail that you get. I could never get this from a stamped image. Absolutely beautiful. Definitely the BetterPress is one of my biggest recommendations of the year if you're thinking about a Christmas present. But anyways, I am just using this as a background. So I just did a tone on tone. I'll talk more about the BetterPress later on, but do keep in mind you can use it for backgrounds like this and for foiling with the Glimmer machine. Next up, we need a sentiment to add, so I thought I'd reach for another product so that I can put it to good use too. This is the large die of the month for Spellbinders November 2023. This creates a really cool floral background, or you can arrange the elements how you want. I actually have a bonus card using this set later in this video, so stay tuned for that. But for now, I'm using the Hello word die there to add to this card. By the way, the set also includes the word smile and you. Okay, so I'm going to stack up my Hello die cut letters. I've cut them twice from white cardstock and once from gold cardstock. And I'm going to glue those together for dimension, but you definitely could skip this dimension if you prefer. One tip when stacking together little die cuts like these letters is to use a sticky mat like this Brutus Monroe stick and stamp mat. I'm also using my Gina K Designs pickup tool. It's got a wax tip that allows me to pick up the small die cuts and place them where I want. So I laid down the first white die cut letters, put glue on top of them, and onto that I'll add the second white die cut. Then on top of that, we'll do the gold. It just is helpful to have these 2 sticky tools to work with these small die cuts. The last piece I need is a white oval. I cut this using the Spellbinders Essential Stylish Oval die set. This die set has ovals in lots of different sizes, and the proportions are just right to put on an A2 card size. I glued a large white oval onto our background. Then I placed our stitch flower onto that. Next, I'm arranging the Hello die cut letters onto my sticky mat so they're positioned just right. I have the spacing just right and I have it in a straight line. Then I will use a piece of tape to pick all of those letters up, and then I can flip it over, put glue on the back of the letters, and then place it wherever I want on the card. By getting the placement of the letters just right on the sticky mat, I don't have to fiddle with each of the individual letters on my card. It's a big time saver. I did leave a little room for the Hello die cuts down here on the bottom. I'll leave the tape on there while it dries. Once I know it's dry, I can peel the tape off and save it for another use. Now there are lots of layers on my card because that's just what I enjoy doing, but keep in mind you could cut back on that. You could keep the background simple, you could skip the oval, you could do 1 layer on the Hello, and that would all save time and dimension. I glued this all onto a 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch top folding white note card, and I added a few gold pearls to the flower. So this first example is kind of following an example, using the products how the company really intended for them to be used, and just looking at their website for inspiration. While doing that, I could kind of get my creative juices going and come up with other ideas for it. So if you like this idea of coming up with 5 ways to use a product, but you struggle with coming up with that many, start with this one. Start by following an example. As you're creating, you'll probably come up with the other 4. This is usually where I start, especially if I'm not feeling creative, but I really want to use a certain product. Okay, this brings me to the second way I approach a new product, and this one is to keep it simple. Oftentimes when you get a new stamp set or die set, there's lots included in it. And I appreciate that companies do that because then we have more ways to use it. But sometimes that can feel overwhelming. So the idea is to create a card that is very simple, using just some of the products. I'm actually going to make 2 cards this way today. On one of them, I'll stitch the flowers. On the other, I won't. So instead of using the full flower, which involved those big petals in the background, which was more die cutting and more stitching, I'm keeping this simpler by just using the smaller flower pieces. Please keep in mind that everybody's definition of simple is a bit different. For some people, it might just mean a simple stamped image and a sentiment on a card. For me, it's just doing a bit less than I normally would do or using less of the product to make it simpler to put together. So this flower on the left, yes, it does have the stitching, which takes a bit of time, but I skipped the big layers on it. So it is definitely simpler, at least in my definition. And then on the one on the right is definitely even more simple because I skipped the stitching altogether. I still love the look of stitching die cuts because the holes and the embossed lines add that fun detail. You don't have to stitch them at all. So I'll make 2 cards, similar designs, similar products since I have them all out. Just one has stitching and one doesn't. I mentioned earlier on every card I try to pull in another product, something else that I can put to good use, and in this case it's an embossing folder background. I'm using a Spellbinders 2D or traditional embossing folder. I have a piece of Concord and Ninth Nectar cardstock in there. It's just such a beautiful color. I misted both sides with a little bit of water, and I'm running it through my Spellbinders Platinum machine, following the instructions for using a regular embossing folder. I like that the Platinum has it printed right there on the plate, so you don't have to remember each sandwich. And here you can see the beautiful impression we get. I could maybe add white pigment ink to the raised areas or gold pigment ink, but I'm going to leave it as is. I did that same background for both of my cards. The last piece we need is a sentiment. Now I'm going to foil my sentiments, and normally foiling isn't as simple of a process. However, I'm using a foil plate and die set that creates a lot of sentiments at once. So once I have done the process, I'll have pieces ready for lots of cards, and that's something that I find kind of simplifies my process. So I'm using the new Spellbinders Glimmer of the Month for November 2023. It has these 2 plates that have lots of sentiments on each. I'm taping the edges down and flipping them up. The tape just acts like a hinge. Underneath the hinge, I'm putting some Spellbinders Gold Matte Foil, and I'm making sure the pretty side of the foil touches the pretty side of the hot foil plates. Over on the left, I have my Spellbinders Glimmer machine, and I have let that warm up so that gray area there is hot and ready to foil. I'll flip the plates down to touch the foil and then flip this all over and put it onto that gray portion of the Glimmer machine. I then will put the 2 Glimmer plates on top and press the timer button. Once the timer button stops flashing, I'll take that all out and run it through my die cut machine. So the Glimmer machine provides the heat, the die cut machine applies the pressure, and you'll get a beautiful foil image every time. And the cool thing about this set is look at all of those sentiments I was able to create at once. So I can use 2 on these 2 cards and save the rest for later. Now there is also a die that's included in this set that cuts out all of the sentiments at once, and it's very easy to line up. However, I did my 2 foil plates too close together, so you can see the edge gets caught off there. That's okay. All I'm going to do is trim off the flag on the other side so I have shorter sentiment strips. You could leave it as is. You could have a flag on one side, flag on 2 ends. It really doesn't matter, but I wanted a simple rectangle strip. So I glued all of these pieces together on a 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch white note card. This first one here is without the stitching, and you can see how the die cuts are really fun with all of that detail, even when you skip adding those stitches. We have the embossing folder texture on the background. We glued die cuts together and added a sentiment. On the right, we have the same card design pretty much, but I added stitching onto those die cuts. And although these have a lot of texture and detail, they're simpler than our last card. I just used some of the products, left others out so I could have a simple design. This is another way to stretch your products. Stretching your products doesn't mean it has to be more complicated. Sometimes it's the complete opposite. Okay, so far we have talked about following an example, which is a great way to get started. Also to keep it simple, and that brings us to our third idea, which is my favorite, and that is to change it up. By changing it up, you use the products in a way they weren't intended to be used. This will definitely give you the most creative, interesting result, and it really is fun to do. So I thought I would take these flowers and instead of using the stem, just create 2 of them and put them kind of together at the center of a card with the sentiment in the middle. It'll just give a different look, and I thought it would be a great way to stretch these supplies. So I did stitching. I could skip it if I wanted to, but I really like that stitching process. And I'm creating 2 pieces exactly the same. And I am layering up the layers because I wanted a card that had a lot of texture and detail. Keep in mind that changing it up doesn't have to be really big change. Sometimes I like to really change things up. Like I'll take a cat image and turn it into a dog, but it doesn't have to be that complicated. It can be a simple change of use of the product. The idea I'm doing here is pretty simple, but I think it gives a great result. Now for the background on this card, I wanted more texture, so I'm using a 3D embossing folder from Spellbinders, and I have a piece of white cardstock that I misted on both sides with water just to get a deeper impression. I'm trying to line up my cardstock piece so that it's centered on the pattern on the inside. Then I'll close the embossing folder and run it through my die cut machine, just following the instructions for a 3D embossing folder. I am crazy about the results of this. Look at like the different layers of dimension that you get with this folder. I definitely want to use it again in the future, maybe adding some ink in the embossing folder and doing some fun techniques. But today I'm just keeping it white. For a sentiment, I'm using Thank You from the Spellbinders Popular Sentiment die set. This has the words Happy Birthday Wishes, Best, For You, Just a Note, and Thank. And it also has the shadow dies, although I'm not using those in this card. And this is a reminder to reach back to older products and use them with your newer products. It's all about getting more use from them. Now it's time to assemble everything together. I die cut the Thank You from gold matte cardstock, and I glued it onto a small white oval die cut. Then we can just glue all of the layers together. So I have these 2 halves of a flower, and I'm gluing one on the center bottom and one at the center top, leaving a small gap in the middle for my sentiment. This will get glued onto our white embossing folder background and then added to a 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch white note card. So to me, this has a different look than the floral cards that I made earlier. And so I was just able to change up the use of the products a little bit and get a different look. So this is something that I like to do a lot, and I usually will skip doing like a follow an example or a simple card and go straight to this. But keep in mind, I've been doing this for many years, and I do it a lot because it's my job. So this is something that you can kind of work your way into. It takes practice by keeping it simple and following an example to be able to think of how to use your products differently. So don't get discouraged if you don't have an idea to change it up right away. Just dive into following an example or creating a simple card, and the ideas will start flowing. This brings us to a 4th way to approach a new product, and that is to combine it with other products you have. I don't mean like I've been doing all along where you just use a different product in the background or as a sentiment, but really use the key parts of 2 different products together or even more. And I don't have a completed card for you this time. I ran out of time to finish it up, but I'm showing you how I kind of played around with 2 different sets and looked at ways to use them together. So I have the 2 different die sets that I showed you before. One has these kind of modern floral and leaves, and the other are from the stitching die set. I thought I'd combine them together. Here I have the stitched flower and then the stem part from the other die set. And notice how that gives us a very different look than the flower that we created earlier on our simple card. I can take this large floral bud piece and give it a haircut, and that'll give me 2 smaller pieces. And what I plan to do with this card is kind of do like a floral swag that goes right down the center of the card, from the top to the bottom, just building up these different floral and leaf images together from the 2 different sets. And that will really allow me to stretch my use and get more out of both of the products. You probably see me do this a lot in videos where I combine different products together. It's one of my favorite things to do. This brings us to our 5th and final way to approach a new product, and that is to step it up. Yep, I love to step up my cards, adding extra details or layers. I just find this is really the fun part of the process for me, but keep in mind everybody is different, and how you step up your card may be different. It could be a simple step it up, and I'll share some of those ideas as we go. What I thought I would do for my card is step up our first card, where I followed an example, by using some felt and gold floss. When I use felt, I like to glue it onto paper, either onto cardstock or thin white paper. That just makes it a little bit stronger when you cut with a detailed die that has tiny little holes. Now, you don't always have to do this. I just find it gives better results when I'm working with small pieces. I chose to use felt for my die cuts to kind of step it up, but there are other ways you can do it. You could add ink to the edges for some ink blending. You could stamp on your die cuts. You could use specialty cardstock. Just sometimes it's just a simple thing that you do to step up your card that makes it a little more interesting and makes it even more fun to create. Another way I chose to step up this card design is to use a gold thread. I'm using DMC Diamant Grande metallic thread. I think that's how you say it. In the past, I've used the regular Diamant, but this time they have this Grande that's a little bit thicker, and I find it's really good to use on cards. So I only use 1 ply of this, and I do the stitching in the same way that I did the regular floss early on. But this metallic just adds a little bit of sparkle and kind of steps up the card a bit. But please, let me remind you, stepping it up means different things to different people. Maybe my first card where I followed an example to you felt stepped up because I did the BetterPress in the background. Everybody's step it up is different. Just look at ways that you can do a few added things to your card to get a different look, something that you maybe normally wouldn't do. It's always fun to try new things, and this is a great opportunity. So now I have all of these felt die cuts with the gold stitching, and I'm gluing them together in the same way as I did earlier. Yes, the Gina K Connect will hold the felt together. You just need to give it a little more time to dry and set something heavy on it while it dries. I kept the rest of the card pretty much the same as my first example I did. I have the white oval, I did the BetterPress tone-on-tone background, and added it to a white note card. I did decide to use one of my foiled sentiments because I had it left over from our simple cards, and I'm just putting foam tape on the ends of that sentiment strip and place it right over the stem. By the way, I did put a little extra layer of cardstock behind the foil sentiment just so it's strong enough to go through the mail. So here we have our stepped up card. You can see there's a lot going on here. You have the texture in the background from the BetterPress. You have the softness of the felt, the shine of the thread, and also some little glitter flat sequins that I added to the flower and leaves, and the shine of the sentiment. So this to me would be my stepped up version using this product. Again, all of these 5 approaches will be different for everyone, and that's okay, and that is really good. Do this in your own way. It's all about just trying to look at your products creatively so you get more use from them. So let's look back at the 4 cards we have and the 5 different approaches I mentioned. The first is to keep it simple, and that's the card on the left. This often means using just some of the product for a simple design. The second card is the approach of following an example. This is often a great starting point when you have a new product. It gets you familiar with the product and gets your creativity going. Now, the third approach isn't shown here with a card, but it is to combine your new products with your old products. This will give you new looks and help you to use more of your crafty stash. The fourth approach to a new product is to change it up. Use the product in a creative way, not as it was intended. This will really stretch your supplies the most. And then the fifth and final approach is to step it up. Look for little details or added bits that you can do to step up your card design. It's always a lot of fun. Before we go, I have 2 bonus cards that I just really had to include in this video. I'm using some of the products I used throughout this video, but in a very different way. I just had a lot of fun with them. For this first one, I used that BetterPress plate that I used on the background on a few of my cards. This time, I'm using it on just some white cardstock. This is plain white cardstock. I'm just temporarily adhering it to the clear plate and adding black ink to the BetterPress plate. Now, since I'm using regular white cardstock, this plate won't leave much of an impression, but it'll leave all that black ink behind, giving us a really detailed, beautiful coverage. And it's much better than I could ever get with a stamp. And check this out. I thought that was so much fun and would be so much fun to color. So I just took this off and sat on the front porch and colored all of that in. It was very therapeutic. And so now I have this fun, colorful background. I trimmed it down and added it to a white note card, and all I need is a sentiment in the center. I have a scrap of white cardstock here that I'm putting onto the clear plate. I have my small Hello There BetterPress plate on the platform. I'll ink that up with the black BetterPress ink, which, by the way, is alcohol marker friendly, so I would recommend using that one if you want to use alcohol markers. I'll run that through my die cut machine. That gives the pressure, and look at that detailed sentiment. So if you want a bit more impression, you'll want to use the BetterPress cardstock because that's a softer, thicker cardstock. I'm just using white scraps for this card, but I love that detail. I did use a circle die to cut out the hello there and added it right to the center. You could add gemstones to this, add a whole lot to this, but I kept it very simple. We just did the BetterPress background, the coloring, and the sentiment in the center. I like doing this so much that I definitely will be making more of these. My second bonus card uses the other floral die set that I used throughout this video. I thought I'd show you how it's intended to look, so this would be my kind of following an example. But first, let's use that BetterPress plate on the background. This time I'm inking up that same BetterPress plate with Hero Art's Unicorn White Pigment ink. And I have a piece of light peach cardstock there, that's Concord and 9th Nectar. And we're going to press that white pigment ink onto that light peach cardstock. This will be very subtle because I'm using white ink on a very light cardstock, but that's what I was going for. The cool thing is this white ink pressed into the cardstock almost looks like a pressed leather. It reminds me of some of the leather goods that I'd see when I was in Italy. Just gorgeous. It's something that you can definitely see better in person, and it's just that little detail to step up this card. But as for everything going on this background, I'm just following an example. I hadn't used this set yet. I actually filmed this first before the others, and this was to get me familiar with how these go together and are arranged. So I'm following an example from the Spellbinders website, even though I did step up the background a bit by doing that BetterPress technique. So you can combine some of the different approaches that I talked about. It's all just really about looking at your products differently and seeing how you can make the most of them. For the sentiment on this one, I'm actually using an Altenew die set. I actually pre-die cut a bunch of these and had them ready to go. So to save time, I just grabbed the Hello Word die and I added that directly onto the card. I created that from 2 layers of white cardstock, and I also added white pearls to the center of the 2 larger flowers. So this card has 2 different approaches to it. One is to follow an example, and the other is to step it up, and that I did on the background. It's subtle, but it definitely adds to the handmade feel of the card. I'm really hoping today's video is helpful to you on how to approach a new product and put it to good use. But keep in mind, you can take these same 5 approaches to older products too. Maybe you have something you haven't used in a while or never used. Use the 5 approaches to get your creativity going. If you're interested in the supplies I use, they are linked below in my YouTube description. I will also link to some of the other videos that I mentioned here at the end. And please hit that subscribe and notification button. That way you will be made aware whenever I have a new regular video and new live videos. I thank you for spending this time with me. I'll see you again very soon.